Hey, my name is Beau. I'm a musician and music teacher, and in this video, I want to talk about how to play the guitar using audiation, or if you are a teacher, how you can teach your students to audiate while they are playing the guitar. Now, the whole point of this is that audiation is the bread and butter of what makes a musician a musician. When you can audiate, you are actually understanding music and really participating with music more like someone who is fluent in a language. So if you're fluent in the language of English, you're really understanding what I'm saying in a completely non-theoretical or conceptual way. You are just directly communicating with me right now through your listening. And often guitar players don't have these basic audiation skills, even if they are technically good guitar players. They could be able to play very difficult things on the guitar, very challenging, like tapping licks or crazy fast scales or something like that. But often what you'll find with technically good guitar players, they're lacking basic musicianship skills. And when someone is lacking these basic musicianship skills, the symptoms are that they can't improvise, they can't identify chord progressions by ear, they may just not sound very musical, their rhythm might be a little off, or they might not have a good vocabulary of rhythm patterns, they may struggle to read music notation. There's a whole host of symptoms. And so I just want to share 5 tips so you can learn how to audiate better on the guitar specifically and teach a student how to do this if you are a teacher. So the first tip is to really just hold off on focusing on music theory and reading notation. And the reason for this is when we first start playing the guitar, if you're a beginner, or teaching a student, if you're a teacher, we want to be teaching by rote. We want to be having the student just involved with music making in a very non-conceptual way. Non-conceptual meaning we're not using a lot of theoretical things and descriptions and factual information. We're not saying, okay, put your finger here because that's a D note and D is part of D minor and we're in the key of D minor, so it sounds good if you play the tonic. We don't want to be teaching people to play music in the beginning like that. We just want to have them saturated in a musical environment, and we want to play something on the instrument and have them copy us. We want to have them play something. We want to play something, have them copy us. And in this way, it's a very kind of imitative exercise, just like how you learn to speak your native language. Now, unfortunately, a lot of teachers, because they feel like they need to be teaching theory and teaching reading music in the beginning, they're really kind of putting the cart before the horse. This would be like showing up to kindergarten when you're 5 years old or whatever, and your teacher is trying to teach you how to read, but it happens to be in a language that you didn't just spend 5 years learning. Now, this is a big problem that goes on in music education. Many students just don't have the prerequisite musical background to even learn how to start reading music effectively, and especially music theory. And so in the beginning, we want to place high emphasis on just having students copy little things, copy bass lines, copy little melodies, copy riffs, and that is called learning by rote. And so the most direct way you could do this is by showing someone something on your instrument and have them try to imitate it. You could also use fretboard diagrams. You could use tabs, but I would prefer like a fretboard diagram or just a straight up visual example on the instrument. And unfortunately, learning by rote gets a bad rep because people are often so excited to teach their students theory or to learn theory because it is a good thing. But again, you don't want to put the cart before the horse. Now, the second key is to make sure that you are covering music that is in a wide variety of tonalities and meters. And so a flaw I see in many beginner method books is so many of the pieces in the beginning tend to be major. But to effectively learn music, we need to be exposed to many different types of sounds, major scales, minor scales, different kinds of chord progressions, different kinds of rhythms, different kinds of meters. We won't learn music very effectively if we aren't exposed to a wide variety of content. Just like you wouldn't learn to speak your native tongue very effectively if your parents only used like 30 words or a very kind of stripped down version of the language. You want to be exposed to a lot of different stuff. And now for a beginner, you might not actually be able to play all this stuff, but you want to be listening to this stuff. And then hopefully your teacher can kind of get you involved and help you figure out when it's appropriate to learn how to play something in Dorian or to learn to play something in Mixolydian if you are thinking about modes. But in the beginning, you especially want to be listening to a lot of different stuff and then very slowly kind of jumping in and trying to play with different kind of stuff. That's really just going to expand your musical vocabulary. And that's really what it's all about. It's all about developing a large musical vocabulary, and large amount of patterns. And now this takes us to the third point that I want to cover, is that we really want to learn through playing music and learn through playing patterns. And so what do I mean by this? A lot of students and teachers either only focus on repertoire or only focus on micro kind of skills. And so some students only focus on learning songs and that's all they do, but they never learn fundamental things like arpeggios or chord progressions or little patterns or scales, different rhythmic ideas. But we can't just teach music through that. We need to actually have a combination of just standard music that we're learning, repertoire that we're learning, and then we need to learn music from the bottom up through ingredients. And so those can be tonal patterns. You could also call them arpeggios if you wanted. They could be rhythms. They could be little melodic patterns, little scale patterns. But we need to spend some time working on these, and we specifically need to make sure that we balance this. So you see kind of two different people here. You see kind of the romantic musician tends to learn music more from repertoire. They just work on pieces, and that's kind of their exposure to the instrument. And they may not do any work with the scales and the patterns and the little micro musical ingredients. And then you get the person who is more technically minded, and they tend to not learn repertoire. They just learn scales. They just learn, okay, I did this like speed picking exercise or something like that. And we need to really make sure that we're bridging the gap between these. Now, specifically in this video, when I'm talking about audiation, when I mean patterns, I mean learning these patterns by ear. You're learning these patterns like they are musical pieces of vocabulary. And when a student learns a piece of musical vocabulary like this, they should be able to sing it. If it's a rhythm pattern, they should be able to produce it with their voice. Da, 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 da. If it's a melodic pattern like boom, 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 they should be able to play it on their instrument and sing it with their voice. And a really good sign that they can do this is that they can sing along while they play with their instrument, or they could bounce back and forth with that. And so that's just a little bit of kind of like a sneak preview into what pattern acquisition is like. But a musician's pattern vocabulary is essentially the lifeblood of what gives that musician the skills that they can actually use, whether they're improvising or composing or jamming with people. And that's actually a very common problem that a lot of even great guitar players have. They don't have very big pattern vocabularies. And so if you take like a really good metal guitar player, but then you put them in a jazz jam session, many of those musicians can't jam in that context, not because their motor system or their physical skills aren't fast enough. They don't have enough patterns to play over those kinds of chord progressions and those kinds of skills. And so their audiation can't even keep up with it. They might try to do it theoretically. They might try to say, oh, I got to play Dorian now. And now, okay, I'm on the 5 chord, so I could use Phrygian dominant. But their audiation skills aren't fast enough. And that's what pattern acquisition does. When you learn music through basically musical vocabulary acquisition, you're thinking musically, you're actually audiating, and that's what makes a good musician is this giant storehouse of patterns. And we can learn patterns by learning little things from licks. We can have a teacher play us a set of patterns and we can commit those to memory. But to audiate these patterns, especially when they're melodic or tonal ideas, you essentially have to be able to sing them. And singing plays an important role in this process because singing proves you can audiate something. If you just can play it on the instrument, but you can't sing it, I don't know if you're just playing it with the mathematical part of your brain that says, okay, this is C, D, and then I went up a fret and then down. You can do stuff like that and not be audiating. But if I ask you to sing something and you can't do it, I know immediately that you're not audiating it. And so using the singing voice as a way to improve your audiation skills is essentially just a giant cheat code or hack, if you want to call it that. But if you can sing the things you play, it's basically like taking musical steroids. And so if you watch good guitar players improvise, like George Benson or Pat Metheny or anyone, all of these musicians can sing while they improvise. They can sing the line at the same time. And the reason they can do that is they're improvising with the musical part of their brain and that's where singing comes from. But often when people play guitar without audiation, they're not playing guitar with that part of the brain that feeds the singing or feeds the whistling. They're playing the guitar with the kind of mathematical part of the brain, and that part of the brain is way too slow to play music on the fly. It's just way too slow. And so that's a bit of a preview into why pattern acquisition is so important. I definitely will have more videos on my channel about that because it's a super important thing for becoming a good musician. Now, the fourth step is that we teach labels of things and theoretical concepts through pattern acquisition. So what do I mean by that? I mean, if I teach you a little pattern like boom, 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 a little minor arpeggio or a little minor tonal pattern, at first, I'm going to make sure you can sing that. I'm going to make sure you can play it. I'm not really going to worry that you know what it's called, that you know it's called minor, that you know it's called 1 flat 3 5, that you know it's called, G, B flat D. I'm not going to really focus on all that kind of stuff. I'm going to make sure, can you play it? Can you sing it? And can you see it on the guitar neck? And then what we'll do, once I'm very certain you're audiating it at that very kind of non-conceptual level, then we go nuts with everything else. We give it a name. We call it G minor. We say it's B. We say it's G, B flat D. We say it's 1 flat 3 5. We do a little picture of the guitar fretboard and link it with all these. I may compare it with something else. I may go boom, 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 and I will say, is that G minor or is this G minor? Boom, boom, boom. And if you can't tell me the difference between those two, it means you're not able to audiate the difference between those two. And so we have to go back to the first level of actually being able to audiate it. And so theory and learning to read music and giving things names and all that crazy stuff will make you a better musician only if you don't put the cart before the horse, or, phrased more rationally, you have to do it at the right time. And so you always audiate something just purely by sound first, and then you add labels to it after. If you try to do it backwards, you're essentially just memorizing a bunch of vocabulary that is not musical information. And so you always start with musical information and then add everything else to it. And that could be sheet music, that could be the guitar visual, that could be the name of it, that could be the harmonic function, like this is the tonic chord in G minor, all that stuff. And you do little games to go back and forth between those, but you always start with just being able to sing and just being able to play the pattern. Now, the fifth pointer that I'll give is that when you're learning to improvise or compose, or you're teaching someone to improvise or compose, do not start theoretically. And so a lot of, I'll give you an example from my own playing. I once took a guitar lesson from a fantastic guitar teacher in Vancouver, and we were learning some crazy, some different pentatonics that you can play that imply the Dorian scale. Really interesting stuff. And, to his fault, he kind of presented this to me theoretically. So he said, okay, here's the scale. You're going to play these notes. This is what the pattern looks like. Now improvise. Now, the reason that doesn't work very well is I didn't learn any patterns. I didn't learn any actual musical patterns. I learned a bunch of theoretical patterns. And so I was sitting there kind of trying to improvise, and it was like kind of working, but then I was listening to him improvise, and it was like he was like a freight train, and it was just such amazing musicianship. And the question is, why when he used that information it worked, but when I used the information I sucked? And the reason is he was actually using musical patterns in his mind that the theory was attached to. I was trying to just use theory, but there's no pattern in my mind. And so I didn't realize this at the time because I didn't have this kind of way of thinking about music acquisition, but I would have been better served by just learning a bunch of licks, learning a bunch of little patterns, singing them, memorizing them, playing around with them. And then what happens is that when you learn the theory, you start to be able to understand stuff with the musicianship really leading the charge. And so this last point is just really about, if you're trying to learn to improvise, if you're trying to teach someone to improvise or compose, do not teach it theoretically. It's just a complete nightmare. Some people, if they're ready for it, if they already have the pattern background, when you give them the theory, they're like, fine, that's cool, I got it. But the thing is, that's not how you start doing this. And so a lot more of what it takes to be a good guitar player, what it takes to be a good musician is just simply learning patterns and then playing around with those patterns and doing that in an intelligent way. Now, there's a lot more that goes into doing this intelligently and sequencing it, but those really are the 5 things that I wish someone had told me when I was younger, and especially I wish I knew when I was a beginning guitar teacher, because when you try to teach musicianship or guitar playing without teaching audiation skills, it just doesn't work very well. People do not end up very musical, and it's really unsatisfying for the student and the teacher. So if you found this interesting, hit me with a comment or question down below. I love talking about this stuff. If you want more, you should check out this video next. I go into a little more into why learning music theory is so difficult for people, and how music theory and audiation kind of intertwine and dance with each other. Because if you learn both of them, you'll just turn into a monster musician. But the problem is that people try to learn theory first, and it just completely screws them up. So if that topic's interesting to you, check out this video. Thanks so much for tuning in.